The special board meeting of the Board of Trustees of Socorro ISD is being held February 23rd, 2021. The time is 5:33. And item number 2, Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone will please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start with item number 3, new business A. Consider approval of proclamation for National School Breakfast Week, March 8th through 12th of 2021. Ms. Shanowski.
Thank you. President Nájera, Dr. Espinosa, and members of the board, to encourage more families to take advantage of the healthy choices available with school breakfast, our Socorro schools will celebrate National School Breakfast Week during March 8th through the 12th of 2021. School breakfast professionals and students will be encouraged to show their enthusiasm for school breakfast. Busy weekday mornings make it a challenge for many families to find time for a healthy breakfast. Fortunately, Socorro schools offer nutritious school breakfasts complete with fruit and a variety of choice of milk to ensure students are fueled for learning every school day. This year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is allowing for children to receive school breakfast and lunch for free without an application. So it's a great time for our families to give school breakfast a try. School breakfast provides a healthy and energizing start to the day for students. Studies show that students who eat school breakfast are more likely to reach higher levels of achievement in reading and math, score higher on standardized tests, have better concentration and memory, and be more alert. And they also maintain a healthier body weight. I am honored to serve as the leader of such an amazing team who have continued to serve not only breakfast but lunch to our community during the pandemic. From March 6th, from last year to date, we have served over 1,915,079 school breakfast meals to our Socorro community children. With that, I would like to read the National School Breakfast Proclamation, if I can say. Whereas the school breakfast program has served our nation admirably since it was permanently established in 1975, and whereas the school breakfast program is dedicated to the health and the well-being of our nation's children, and whereas the school breakfast program joins and has been joined through the years by many other excellent child nutrition programs, and whereas there is evidence of continued need for nutrition education and awareness of the value of school nutrition programs, now therefore, I, Shelley Chernowski of the Child Nutrition Services Department with Socorro ISD, do hereby proclaim the week of March 8th through the 12th, 2021 as National School Breakfast Week. And I encourage all residents to become aware and concerned about their children's and their own nutrition habits in hope of achieving a more healthful citizenry for today and the future. Administration respectfully asks for your approval.
So move.
Second?
Was it Mr. Garcia?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a motion by Mr. Guerra and a second by Mr. Garcia. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, President Nájera.
Yes, sir, Dr. Espinosa.
Yes, again, I'd like to thank Ms. Shanowski, Shelley Shanowski, for our outstanding leadership, Mr. Gilbert Melendez, right over here on the side. You know, when this pandemic hit in about this time last year, our CNS employees were serving breakfast, lunch, you know, and putting themselves out there, you know, to make sure that our families, our students continue to be served. And they continue that to this day. So, you know, thank you so much, Ms. Shanowski, Mr. Melendez, and your entire team. Sometimes people think that Their work does not go unnoticed. Let me tell you, it has been noticed tremendously by many, many individuals. I just cannot thank y'all enough. Great job.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Shanowski. Item 3B, consider approval of purchaser's grading plan improvements entitled Emerald Heights Unit 5 Grading Improvements. Mr. Ianton.
Yes, good evening, President Nahara, Dr. Espinosa, and members of the board. This item is in consideration. Back in January, the board approved to purchase 2 parcels of land. This is the first parcel, which I believe I've got. I don't have it. There we go. That's yours. There we go. There we go. This is the parcel that is located down by, off of East Lake. This is East Lake High School right here. This is Emerald Pass that goes in front of East Lake and will continue down. And the wide area here is the area that the 26 plus or minus acres that we are looking to purchase. As a part of the purchase agreement and the development agreement, the developer is supposed to provide grading to this site. Right now, if you go out there, it's just
A
desert.
hill, right?
So it is a slope site. They will sheet grade it across in order to prepare for the construction whenever we decide to build. They will also provide the streets in the blue around the property as a part of the development agreement. But the developer wanted us to approve, or the board to approve, the grading plan, which we have reviewed. And basically, it's the same thing we do with all of our parcels. Anytime we buy a piece of property from a developer, they are to grade it, to sheet grade it, and then we come in there and to design the school. So administration recommends approval of the grading plan as presented, and I think Yvette has a document to be signed if so approved.
So move. Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Guerra and a second by Mr. Morales. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Ianton.
Thank you.
Item 4, Board Workshop A, Budget Presentation. Mr. Reza.
President Nájera, Dr. Espinosa, members of the board. Tonight, we will continue a series of workshops for the purpose of reviewing and adopting the 21-22 fiscal year budget for the Socorro Independent School District. Here is the agenda for tonight's meeting. I will be discussing the state legislature's funding proposals, both the House and the Senate. I will also go over the current federal funding proposals impacting K-12 education. I will give you a preliminary number with respect to the prospective maintenance and operations property tax rate. We'll look at the general fund revenue estimates. We'll discuss the current budget development activities, and we'll look at the agenda for the March 30th budget workshop. With respect to the legislative budget developments, let's talk about the House. The House is proposing $119.7 billion in general revenue. This amount is $3.2 billion below the 7.06% spending limit adopted by the Legislative Budget Board, and it maintains the 5% decrease to state agencies that were directed by Governor Abbott in 2020. This also maintains the legislature's commitment to House Bill 3 by funding the Foundation School Program at $53 billion for all funds and $41.2 billion in general revenue. The proposed budget adds $3.1 billion in general revenue to fund enrollment growth. It adds $992 million for tax compression and $1.1 billion in general revenue to replace the one-time CARES Act funding that was provided by the federal government in 2020. This budget also provides $5.9 billion in general revenue for the teacher retirement system, with an increase of $838 million to fund the increased state contribution rate. With respect to with respect to the Senate proposal, that's Senate Bill 1, they also are allocating $119.7 billion in general revenue. This amount represents a 4% growth in general revenue and maintains the 5% decrease to state agencies implemented in 2020. This proposal also maintains the legislature's commitment to House Bill 3 and provides an additional $1 billion for tax compression for the 22-23 biennium. This proposed budget adds $3.1 billion in general revenue to fund enrollment growth, which is estimated to be an additional 36,000 students for the state, an additional $452.8 million for teacher retirement system. The budget also provides $897.6 million for statutory required contributions to TRS Care to maintain current health insurance benefits and premiums for retired teachers. And finally, the proposal also includes $70 million to transition to statewide online STAR testing. And just for your information, it's not listed here. Currently, there's 2,718 House and Senate bills that have been proposed for the legislature. Last year, there was over 7,324. So there's a lot less bills that have been introduced this year, with 18 days remaining for a state legislator to go ahead and submit a bill for consideration by the legislature, the House and the Senate. Let's talk about federal funding proposals. As you all know, there's CARES Act, what we call ESSER number 1. That provided $13.2 billion to the states for K-12 education. The funds flowed through Title I to school districts, of which Socorro ISD received $9.8 million. But I want to remind the board that there was a commensurate decrease in our state funding by the state, and that was withheld. So TA used the CARES funding to help reduce the deficit in the current biennium. If you remember, back in July of 2020, the comptroller estimated the biennium would be $4.6 billion. Last month, he estimated that that deficit had been reduced to $900 million as of January of 2021. So this funding stream is expected to continue through 2022. Now in December, Congress allocated an additional COVID-19 funding, what we call ESSER 2. I think they call it CARISA funds. This provides $54.3 billion to state in K-12 education. Now, Texas is roughly projected to be eligible to receive $5.5 billion, of which 90% or $4.97 billion would be going to the school district. However, I want to remind the board that the legislature has a habit of using federal funds for the purpose of possibly balancing the budget they're planning. So we will see if that's going to happen. That's something we're going to be looking at closely to see whether the state legislature uses that to balance the budget and surplant, or maybe uses it to supplement the budget for other initiatives that have been approved by the legislature. And these funds are available through September of 2023. The third item is President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief proposal. Part of President Biden's plan to reopen schools and normalize operations, it may provide an estimated $130 billion, and I've heard $145 billion for K-12 education. Funds would be reported to go for reducing class sizes to accommodate social distancing, improve ventilation, hiring more janitors, and providing more personal protective equipment to school districts. Consideration of this proposed legislation is expected to take place this week or finalized by the end of mid-March. Now, what I've heard is these funds are expected to be available over a 2-year period, but I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal today where they're stating that these funds might be available to school districts through 2028. And then I read another article by Mitt Romney, who's stating that he's concerned because the Congress Budget Office is estimating that after 22, there will still be $700 billion still remaining of these funds. So we'll see. So what can we take from this information? Okay, so things to consider for the moment. Obviously, House Bill 3 in the legislature is fully funded and will not change. We also know that property tax rate compression will continue for the next 2 years. And it's highly likely that federal funds may flow down to school districts could be used to assist with either supplementing the budget or if federal guidelines allow to maybe supplant the budget. But irrespective of what I said about President Biden's plan, it's important to keep in mind that the use of federal funds should be for one-time expenditures or non-repeating expenditures so as not to create a funding cliff. It's something to consider. But we'll know as we go forward through the legislature how they use those SR2 funds, and hopefully we'll know by mid-March, if not sooner, what happened with President Biden's $1.9 trillion proposal. And that's the bill that has $1,400 payments to individuals who earn less than $75,000. For a couple, if its joint return is $150,000. It also has the $15 per hour minimum rate, which would be implemented over a 5-year period. That is something where people feel might not pass, but we'll see what happens. It's something just to keep in mind. So let us talk about our funding assumptions. I think I went one. So when we talk about funding assumptions, the first thing we talk about is our tax rates. So when we look at the operating funding assumptions, the maintenance and operations property tax rate, I am projecting to start off that it to be 92 cents. And then I'm projecting the current maximum compressed tax rate will be 87 cents with the board approval of 5 golden pennies added to that. I'm also projecting that our property values will grow by 5.25% to $11.3 billion. Just to remind the board that we get our preliminary values in late April, and we get our certified values, which is what we use to set the tax rate, in late July. But this is going to change as we get more up-to-date information. So I'm also projecting that the tax collection rate will be 98%, and that at $11.3 billion, the yield per penny for maintenance and operations is $1,136,795. So let me just give you a little history about our tax rate. So prior to 2020, our tax rate for maintenance and operations was 98 cents. With House Bill 3, that maximum compressed tax rate was reduced to 93 cents, and in that year, we were allowed to go up 4 golden pennies, which the board did. So our tax rate was 97 cents. So that year, we reduced the maintenance and operations tax rate by a penny and 16 cents. So in 2020, there was further compression. Our values went up almost 6.4%. And because of that, the maximum compressed tax rate was 89 cents. The board approved unanimously adding 5 golden pennies, because if we didn't, we would have lost over $5 million in state revenue. And so our tax rate this current year for maintenance and operations is 94.44 cents. That is a reduction of 2.56 cents over 2020. So what are we looking at to start off next year? So right now, as I stated, I am projecting that our tax rate, if you look at the bottom on the right side, would be 92.09 cents. I am assuming that our valuation growth will be 5.25%. If that comes to fruition, that means that our compressed tax rate would be 87.09 cents. This year, the board does not have to have a unanimous vote to add the 5 golden pennies. It has to be a majority vote. I can't speak for the board, but I'm making the assumption that the board would do that, and in which case, early on, again, this is subject to change as we get more up-to-date information on our values. We're looking at an M&O tax rate of 92.09 cents, which is a little over 2.35 cents lower than our current tax rate. So that's for the local tax rate. Let's talk about state funding. Now, when you talk about state funding, that's based on average daily attendance. And so it's important to keep in mind is that we have to budget for enrollment because we have to staff for enrollment. But the state reimburses us through attendance. And you never have a one-to-one swap. When you look at the students in our school districts that generate revenue, what we call membership, it's usually about 95% of enrollment. Now, we have students in our student body that don't generate revenue. And when you add those students, the total enrollment, that ADA becomes down to about 93%. So average daily attendance is what we use as the basis for determining our state revenue. Now, I want to inform the board that right now there's 2 bills in the legislature that would use average enrollment as opposed to attendance. And that is Senator Lucio's Senate Bill 728. And on the House side, you have, I think, Gina Hinojosa's House Bill 1246. And we're hopeful that perhaps that'll take some traction and go somewhere. And in using, I haven't seen the particulars of the bill, but enrollment certainly would be a little bit more fair. Although yesterday on the Senate hearing, there were some questions as to if you used enrollment, would school districts be motivated to go after kids that they've lost or have gone out of the system? So we're hopeful that maybe they don't think that we wouldn't be looking for our kids. So having said that, let's talk about the assumptions that I'm using for average daily attendance for state funding.
I'm sorry, Mr. Reza, can you repeat those bill numbers, please?
Yes, ma'am. For the Senate bill, that's Senate Bill 728. And then the House bill would be House Bill 1246.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So when we look at attendance, I need a basis to compare what we're going to be using for next year. So I'm looking at last year's attendance. So you'll see that attendance by the state is earned over six weeks periods. Now in 2020, right before the pandemic hit the school district, we had 4 6 weeks of average daily attendance. And if you see that first row, our attendance at that time was 43,775. That represented a 1.21% increase over the prior year. And then we got hit with COVID. So the official ending average daily attendance for the school district was 42,285, a 2.22% decrease. Any idea as to why that would be? Any idea? So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So what happened is that, as I mentioned before, the Texas Education Agency reduced our state funding by $9.8 million because of the CARES funding that we received. So what they had to do is they required school districts to lower their ADA to match the total revenue that we got from the state. So when we reduced, when they reduced the $9.8 million, our ADA did a corresponding reduction, so it kind of trued up to the amount of state funding that we got. So when I'm looking at what our growth is for this year and next year, I'm not looking at our ending ADA, even though that's the PEMS number. I'm using a truer number in my estimation, which was the 4 6 weeks ADA that we had at the end of 2020. So when you look at that, I'm projecting that our ADA is 44,238. Where am I getting that number? Well, actually, it's our actual ADA for the second 6 weeks in 2021. Now, the TEA is providing what they call a whole harmless. They've come up with a floor for average daily attendance for Socorro ISD, for refined ADA and some of the special populations. And that floor is 44,252. It's about a 44 higher than the current ADA that I listed there. Now, it's important to keep in mind is the commissioner is going to make a determination either this month or next month whether that ADA will be extended for that whole harmless will be extended for the whole year instead of the first 3 6 weeks of this fiscal year. We will see. But it's not a panacea totally because it's not only the refined ADA, but they're also making whole harmless amounts for our special populations, for special education, for career tech. And there is no whole harmless for those students that are considered economically disadvantaged. It's none. But keep in mind is that when we look at the numbers that they've assigned for special ed and career ed, they're lower than we generated in that second 6 weeks. And what TA has told us is that, look, it's all or nothing. When we give you the whole harmless, we're not going to pick and choose to say, okay, this one's higher, you get this one's lower. Okay, we won't take, they take the whole thing. That's what it is. So right now, if they go with the whole harmless, we'll certainly generate more refined ADA, but some of the special pops, especially SPED and career tech, is going to generate lower revenue. So I just want to let you know about that. So anyway, I am projecting 44,238 at this year, which is a 1.05% increase over last year. Now you might ask, well, didn't we have a decrease in enrollment? We did. When you look at the PEMS October snapshot in October, we were about 480 students lower than last year. That's a 1% decrease. Well, if we have a 1% decrease in enrollment, how can you have a higher ADA? Well, it's because we're using, and the state allows it, is the asynchronous method of attendance. In a regular year, you had to be in class at 10 o'clock, and that teacher had to count you there. Now, because of virtual instruction, the state is allowing us to have a little bit more flexibility. They may not be in that class that day, but as long as we follow up with them, we can count them for ADA. So that is why I'm still projecting that our ADA is going to be at least 1.5%, but we'll find out as we go through the year. And I am projecting that we will have an increase in ADA for 2022 because I do think parents are anxious to get their kids back to school. I think once they feel that there's herd immunity, once they've gotten vaccinated, I do have a lot of optimism for the school district. This is the best school district in the area, bar none. We have the best programs, we have the best schools. I'm optimistic. When you look at weighted average daily attendance, which includes the special populations, I'm projecting a 2.44% increase to 62,172 WADA. And then I'm projecting that the comptroller's property tax division valuations will be $12.1 billion. So what you have here is our opening estimates with respect to state revenue. On Tier 1, I'm projecting that our Tier 1 funding less the available school fund will be $271.6 million. And you see there the special population revenue that we're generating for those particular categories and those particular special populations. I'm assuming that the board would approve the 5 pennies for Tier 2, and in so doing, we would generate $24 million in additional revenue. Keep in mind that the state allows a school district to go up to 8 cents, but for us, we would have to have an election to be able to capture those pennies or more. So this is our revenue estimates for starting revenue estimates. I'm projecting that for the general fund, our revenues would be $444.8 million. That's about $1.2 million increase over our amended budget for the current year. You'll see there's an increase in local sources of $1.7 million, and that's attributable to our property value projected growth of 5.25%. Even though the state is reducing the tax rate because of tax compression, they're doing that to limit the amount of tax collections to at least less than 3.5%. That was what was adopted by the legislature several years ago. I'm also assuming that with a 1% increase in average daily attendance, that our state revenues would go up by $1.7 million. And then I'm projecting we would have a decrease of $2.3 million in federal sources. We have a federal program called SHARS that allows the school district to get reimbursed for services provided to special education students. Usually these are nurses and other personnel that track their time. They bill it, they submit it to our third-party administrator who reviews it, and most of it comes in the following year. Not all of it. Some of it comes in this year, but most of it comes in the following year. There's a time lag. This year, we're not providing those services, at least not how we've done it in the past. So I do believe that we'll have a negative impact in our budget with respect to federal funds in the general fund for next year. So having said that, again, I want to remind the board that there's 4 certainties in life. 1 is we're born, 2 is we die, 3 is we get taxed, and 4 is that my revenue estimates are going to change. You know, it's going to change because we have up-to-date information. Yeah, I got to make it funny. Budget is not exactly a funny thing. So having said that, the current budget developments is that we're going to wrap up budget development reviews. We've done that already. We have gotten requests from departments for additional funding. Right now, that totals up to about $9.5 million. What we're going to do is review them. We take it to cabinet and we discuss what is needed to be included in the budget. Last year was about $9.2 million that were requested. We allocated or approved about $2.5 million. We'll be conducting budget reviews for the campus budgets next week and the second week in March. We'll also be conducting staff reviews in March. And then finally, we will receive our what we call preliminary property values from the Central Appraisal District. For the last several years, the Central Appraisal District have given me values and said, here are your property values as of the end of March. But beware, this is going to change. But it gives me an idea of whether this early assumption is in the ballpark. And again, keep in mind that if those valuations are lower, then the tax rate would be higher. If those valuations are higher, then the tax rate is going to be lower, given certain assumptions. So again, it's something we'll look at. So the March 30 budget workshop, we're going to update our legislative, give you information on legislation or federal funding proposals, the ones we've talked about. Obviously, at that point in time, we can get more up-to-date information of what's been approved, what hasn't. We'll look at updated revenue estimate information. We'll review our general fund budget cost drivers. We'll provide you a budget of the general fund by class object. and then we'll discuss our April 13th budget workshop. So in looking at what other districts do, other districts, namely El Paso and Isleta, have brought to their board in April compensation proposals. And why? Because 85% of our budget is salaries and benefits. I really need to know what this board's going to approve with respect to compensation. So the sooner we can present this, the sooner whatever's approved. On the latter part, we can make some changes with respect to the budget to see what's being adopted. So that is what we're presenting today. I hope it was quick. I hope it was informative. I'm certainly here to answer any questions.
Mr. Reza, what are we looking at on compensation at this time?
So we're still working on that, Mrs. Nájera. I think we always start with 1.5%, and we go from there. Don't quote me, but I do think that we'll probably move that up to 2%. Historically, this board has provided a lump sum payment. Historically, we haven't presented that as a recommendation. I need to talk to Dr. Espinosa about that as we go through it. So,
Will we have something projected by our March 30th?
yes, ma'am. We'll have something there. And again, you wouldn't be adopting compensation then. It would be more in April. But
Right.
I need to see what the numbers are, and then from there we can go. And then I need to talk to my boss and what we can present to the board. But again, this is we're starting early.
President Nájera, this
Yes.
is Ms. Rodriguez. I've got a couple of questions.
Yes, Ms. Rodriguez?
Mr. Reza, thank you so much for the information. It looks like, again, based on some of the information that you've presented, budget-wise, it looks like we might be okay. Now, what I am going to ask is, again, based on the situation we're in, we know our students are falling behind. We know our students are not, getting the, the services that they're receiving. I know our teachers are doing a great job. Our staff is doing a fantastic job, but we are going to have some students that are going to fall behind. So in our budget proposal, and Dr. Espinosa, this is probably something that curriculum and instruction may need to address as well. What are our plans on, holding summer school or intersessions or, after school camps, once we do get more students on our campuses, because that is going to impact the budget as well, and looking at what services, how we're going to support our students. And then the other thing, I know you discussed also the issue of a one-time lump sum payment, but I know we've already talked about our health benefits and what that's going to look like. Again, if we are looking at compensation, we need to include that as well, because I hopefully am going to say that, our compensation, our raises are not going to go to an increase in paying for the health insurance. That's happened to me several times where, we got this much of a raise, and then, my benefits were raised as well, and I saw maybe a $2 increase per paycheck. So if we're looking at that, I know it's all going to be impacted, but it looks like our potential budget is going to be okay. So I ask, as we move forward in our budget workshops, to make sure we're addressing these issues as well, as you all are working out the details on what you're going to present to the board.
Yes, Ms. Rodriguez, I will certainly get with Dr. Espinosa and the other cabinet members to discuss, perhaps in our March 30th presentation to the board on the budget, see if we can provide information with respect to plans for summer school as well as intersession. And I can assure you, with respect to healthcare, we are not making any changes to the plan so that our employees might feel like, you might give us a raise on this side, but you're taking it away from the benefit premiums. That's the purpose of having that meeting, I believe, in December and November. It's not going to change
Correct.
for this year that's coming up.
Okay.
I can assure you of that. So, but we'll certainly make sure that we include information for the board with respect to the March 30th on your concerns with respect to summer school and intercession for the 21-22 school year.
President Nahara,
Mr. Guerra?
and I believe this is the first time since a couple of months ago, and we thank the board because we did not raise the premiums. So when we look at an increase, when we look at raising the unemployment, when we look at raising the compensation for the employees, because we have an A-rated district, when we look at raising a pay raise for our employees, this will be the first time in a long time that we're not raising the premiums. So it's going to be a plus.
Yes, sir, I think you're correct. I think you're right, because in past years, we've done some changes with respect to either premiums
done
or
both.
adjusting the deductible amount and so forth.
What I'd like to see on the March 30th budget, if possible, if we could look at, we've done the past 2 years, where we call it a stipend, or we call it a bonus at the end of the year. If we could look at possibly doing, and I know, if we could look at, Mr. Ressa, possibly doing a stipend at the end of the year, but maybe also doing call it what you want to call it, maybe a Team SSD COVID-19 relief fund, maybe sometime in May, like you're talking, President Biden was talking about a COVID-19 relief fund, maybe call it Team SSD COVID-19 relief fund. You know, see, we could budget something in that aspect.
So just to be clear, Mr. Guerra, you're saying aside from a lump sum payment, is it possible to do an additional
Correct.
COVID-19 relief fund
Correct.
stipend?
Correct.
Okay. We'll certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Raisa, thank you so much for this information, and we will look forward to March 30th.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. If there's no further business before this board, we are adjourned. The time is 6:10.